Okay, so today we're going to be talking about it's part one of our Millage series that we do every March. And today is Joe and I are going to talk about establishment and your millage amount in terms of how do you figure out how much of a millage to go for and how does your establishment affect that. So with us today is Joe, and Joe introduced himself. I'm Claire Membiella. I'm the library law consultant for the Library of Michigan. I work with Joe very closely, and my job is to help libraries understand legal issues and how that interacts with your operation of your library. So we want to say welcome to everybody, to all the trustees, all the directors, all the co-op directors who are here. For those trustees, thank you very much for being a trustee. If it wasn't for you, Michigan Public Libraries couldn't exist. So we know that being a trustee is, every good deed goes unpunished, and no good deed goes unpunished is the phrase. And I think that's pretty evident as a trustee. It's a lot of work, but it can be a lot of reward. So, but even then, it is for what you get paid, it is an awful lot of work. So we want to say thank you for that to all of you who are helping your communities in this way. Since we are talking about some legal issues today, I have to issue my standard disclaimer, which pretty much just says that we are providing you with a lot of information today, and you should look at this information and consider it just that, information. As I recently heard in one of the podcasts that I listened to, do not take legal advice from a webinar. In their case, they say podcaster, I'm saying webinar. So do not take legal advice from a webinar. So if you have a question that goes beyond the basics, or if you see something that we talk about when we talk about not a good idea to do this, and you are doing it, you may want to contact your attorney. Every library should have an attorney that specializes in library law and the activities of public libraries. If you do not have that, because depending on your establishment, it may be that you use your municipal attorney, you may want to consider at least establishing some kind of relationship with an attorney that specifically practices library law. Your municipal attorney, they're all awesome, and I'm sure for many things you do, that's fine. But for when you have certain questions that are very library specific, most municipal attorneys aren't trained in specific library law, which can be kind of complex and nitpicky. So that's why we recommend that you at least know a library law attorney to consult. If you have any questions or you're not sure and you'd like to know, what attorneys out there practice library law, contact me and I can provide you with a list. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about here, this is the Millage series. I just want to give you a heads up on the four kind of installments and what they're going to talk about. So it's every Monday in March, starting with today, March 4th. They are all at 1 o'clock. The first one today is we're going to talk about how do you know how much to ask for, and how does your establishment affect the millage process. Next week, it will be legal tips for the millage process, and Ann Surink from Foster Swift, who is one of the preeminent library law attorneys in the state. She works with a lot of libraries. She's going to discuss some legal things you need to know about doing your millage and your millage language and all that. March 18th, we have Shirley Bursama, who is a library trustee and board consultant. Shirley has been a chair of, as well as a member of, the Kent District Library Board. She has been involved with libraries, being on boards for years and decades, and she works with an awful lot of libraries throughout the state on helping them pass their millage. Over 100 millages she has worked in, and she's only lost 2. So she is an excellent person to get to know and to work with and to get information from if you are looking at passing a millage. She's going to talk about yes committees. And lastly, on March 25th, every library, which is a national, it's kind of a PAC. It's the only PAC that works with libraries. They do a lot of campaign advising and Consulting, and they're going to talk to us about millage campaigns and how to have some of those difficult discussions with municipal officials and constituencies on why you need to have a library millage, and why this is a good idea, even with all of the things that are going on in library land right now. So that's our millage series this year. So if you register for one, you generally have access to all of them. You don't have to attend all of them. So you can pick and choose, or you can come to all of them. And we will be releasing the recordings for all of them. Anything you want to add to that, Joe?
Yeah, I got to find the mute button or the unmute button quicker. No, I think you laid it out. It's going to be a good series, and it will definitely be very useful. Yeah, definitely check those out.
Okay, so what we're talking about today is going to be libraries. So how libraries are funded in Michigan, how establishment affects funding and millages, how much funding does your library need? We're going to talk about that mystery of what is 3/10 of a mil of local support, which is a requirement for state aid. And many libraries in the state actually have their millage set at 3/10 of a mil. And how do you calculate the amount of millage that you make? How do you count the amount of money you're going to get if you do pass the millage? So that can help you understand what size of a millage you need to go for. How many mills do you need to go for? A whole amount of mills your statute enables you to, or can you ask for less? Okay, so first we're going to talk a little bit about establishment, because establishment kind of forms the basis for a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So your library's establishment is pretty much the law that your library was founded under. So in Michigan, public libraries are founded by municipalities. So they're founded at the local level. How they're founded or how they're established is determined by what law the municipality uses to establish the library. So what the establishment law does is, if you think of it like a corporation, right? If you're going to start a business, you have to incorporate with the state of Michigan, right? You have to file paperwork, and that paperwork and filing enables your company to become a company, to become an entity that hires people, that has a bank account, that it pays taxes, that can own money and can exert some kind of authority. So that is what establishment does for a library. Establishment creates the entity, right? Allows the library to hire people, allows the library to own property, and allows the library to set policies and enforce them. So that is what the establishment does. In Michigan, there are about 11 different, there are about 7 or 8 establishment laws that establish about 11 different types of public libraries. So the other thing establishment does, it also allows the board to have legal authority. So library boards in just about every establishment type in Michigan are the legal authority over the library. So in effect, are the quote unquote boss over the libraries. All of the powers from a board come from your statute. So depending on which establishment statute you have, boards have different levels of authority and different duties, and different abilities to do different things. Your establishment law will also determine whether or not you can levy a separate millage, or what we call a dedicated millage, and how much that millage can be for. Now, when we talk about a dedicated library millage, we're talking about a millage that is levied separate from the municipality's constitutional millage limit, right? So the Constitution says that municipalities cannot levy over a certain amount of money or a certain amount of mills, in total, right? So they cannot, I think it's like 15 mills. So municipality is not allowed to levy in millages more than a certain amount of ad valorem property tax. So what this does is, if your statute has a line in it that permits the library to levy a millage, or the municipality to levy a millage on behalf of the library, then what that's giving the library the authority to levy that millage outside of that millage cap. So that can be important, right? Because there are some municipalities that are very dedicated to ensuring that their millage levels are at a certain level. right? And there are others that are very close to that millage cap. And so they may not want to levy a library millage because they're worried it's going to push them over that millage cap. So that's an important thing to know. And then also your establishment can determine certain other laws that may impact your funding, whether or not these laws apply. Things like for a district library, you're also covered by the Municipal Finance Act, like many municipalities are. And that has some different impacts to millages, as well as the ability to levy bonds. So that's why your Establishment Act is incredibly important to understand. So all your libraries are not, as we said, every Establishment Act is not the same. So we talk, some libraries can have dedicated millages, some can't. So if you're a library that is a department of your city, right, not a library under PA 164, but a library that is completely under the auspices of the city. So your city council is your library board. Well, since you're a department of the city, you do not have the ability to levy a millage that is outside the city's millage cap. So that's one example of how your establishment can affect your millages. District libraries have total control over their millages. So district libraries are quasi-municipal entities. They're the most autonomous form of public library in Michigan, and they can levy their own millage. They don't have to go through a different municipality. They can levy their own bonds, and the board of a district library has total control over that process. They submit their millage to the county to just be put on the ballot. School public libraries, if you're a school public library, so if you're on the advisory board, say of a school public library where the library, or excuse me, where the school board is the library board, then you cannot have a millage at all. Your funding comes from the school district, so your funding would come from the regular school millage. You cannot have a separate library millage at all, and that's actually written into the statute. So as you can see, knowing what your establishment is very important when it comes to millages. Joe, you have anything you want to throw in with that?
I do when we get a little further down and start talking about determining what you're after and the amounts.
Okay. So if you are a PA 164 Section 1 library, which is a city library, it's a type of city library, and it's pretty much characterized by a 5, 7, or 9 member appointed board. Part of your establishment is a charter or ordinance section with your city. This is a type of library under the City, Village, and Township Libraries Act, or what we like to call PA 164. Your library is has an independent board, a governing board. And when I say governing board, I mean a board that has legal authorization to be the legal representative of the library, as opposed to an advisory board, which is usually a board that works under the governing board and just kind of advises and offers information and can act as a liaison. So a city library under Section 1, within that establishment statute, that type of library is permitted to levy up to 1 mil of a 1 mil without a vote, because that's written into the statute. It says that the city council can vote to levy 1 mil without putting it on the ballot, and that's very rare in this state. Now, it can only go up to 1 mil and is totally in the decision of the city council. Even though the library board has total control over the money and the funding, this is one thing that the city library cannot determine. It's totally up to the city council, and they can determine to levy it or not. Now, in addition to that 1 mil levied without a vote, if they want, the library board can decide to go for a millage of up to another mil to be put on the ballot. And that's for a combination of 2 mils for a library Section 1. A county library is also kind of unique in that a county libraries originally had the same option. They would have their millage would be without a vote and would be totally determined by the county. Essentially, the county, it's an appropriation, right? In terms of the county, it's like an appropriation. The statute for county libraries does not limit at all the amount of money that can be levied by the county. It's totally up to the county board of commissioners as to how much they would like to levy for the library. And hopefully that's something that's determined in accordance with the county library board, which does have total control of the money in the library fund. So that's the extent of a county library's millage. Both of these are pretty unusual in Michigan law. It is very unusual in Michigan to be able to levy a millage without a vote. Okay, as we mentioned, your establishment will determine your limit, right? So PA 164 has a limit of 2 mills unless you're a city section 1, in which case you get 1 mill unvoted, 1 mill voted. District libraries have up to a 4 mill limit of voted millages. And as we mentioned, county libraries have no limits mentioned in their statute, but their millage is susceptible to the county millage limit as it is in the Constitution. So how do you find your establishment? What if you're not sure what you are? Well, at the Library of Michigan, we maintain files of all of the libraries in the state. And hopefully within those files will be copies of your establishment documents. If not, we can help you kind of trace your establishment. I do a lot of research on that. To trace your establishment back and then figure out what your current establishment is. Because when we say library establishment, we mean your establishment right now. We don't mean your establishment when you were created in 1875. We mean what your establishment is today. So if you were a city library, if you were a township library that became a city library, we're only interested in city library. If you're a library that became a district, we're only interested in you as a district library. That's what your current establishment is. We do have a chart on our website. The link is here on the slide that gives you a layout of all of the recognized public library establishment types that Michigan has, what their characteristics are. So how many board members, whether the board's elected or appointed, what kind of documents form the foundational documents for that type of library. And that chart may help you figure out what you are. Also, you'd ask for your historic files in your library. Talk to your directors. And if you're a director, take a look and see, especially if you're a new director, go through the files and see, if there's any historical documentation in there. Generally, what you're looking for are things like your municipal governance meeting minutes from the time your library was created, municipal resolutions from that time, library board minutes from around that time. You're looking for any documents from Library of Michigan, particularly letters that say, we welcome you as a blank blank library. Or in a state of a district library, we approve the formation of this library. Any kind of contracts you have for service with another municipality. Many times contracts have the beginning part, which is often called a recitation, which says exactly what the library contracting, what it is, under what law they're established. And of course, newspapers and local histories can be great help. Again, you are welcome to contact us and we can help you. Take a look at your current organization. How many board members do you have? Are they elected or appointed? Do you have a millage? Are you funded by appropriation? How are financial decisions made? Does your board make the decisions on the finances, or does your municipality make the decisions? Because that can also give you a hint as to what your establishment is. Although I have to say it's not always indicative. So it wouldn't be the main thing you would depend on, because we have a lot of municipalities in the state that frankly encroach upon a library board's authority. So it wouldn't be the only thing that I would look at. You can take a look at the most recent L4029 form, which is the form that the county uses to see all of the millages in a particular municipality. They're available for free. At the Treasury has a website that lists all of them by county. I have the link here. You just look up your county and then you look up your municipality. District libraries usually have their own, and you can see it'll say exactly what your millages are. If you look at a city one and it says that here's the millage, it's a library millage, and then it says just the statute number. So it may say PA 164, or it may say MCL. And then it says at the end, it says NA for expiration date or date the millage ends. If you see that, then that's a good indication that that's a PA 164 millage levied without a vote. So likely you're a city library under PA 164 Section 1. The problem is that sometimes municipalities don't follow the rules. So what you're really looking for is a totality of characteristics, not just any one of these things to confirm your establishment. And again, contact us and we'd be happy to help you. Read your documents. If, board members, directors, both of those parties should definitely read your documents. If you have any kind of agreements, whether it's contracts for service, whether it's a written agreement with your municipality over either fiscal agency or, a lease, make sure you read them. Make sure you read the statute that governs your establishment type. If you're an establishment type that also has a charter or an ordinance, read that, because all of those things together form the legal basis for your entity, and also comprise the rules and laws that govern a lot of your entity, and establishes what your authorities and powers are in terms of oversight of your entity. Never assume that you're something. If you're a city library, don't assume you're a PA 164. If you don't assume you're a department of the city. Make sure that you know what you are. Okay, I am going to ask Joe now to talk about this first part of ensuring your millage will pay enough. So yeah, you're going to get a millage. How do you know whether or not the millage you want is going to give you enough money, Joe?
Right. So the basic thing you're looking for, and it may not be enough, is to meet that 0.3 of a mil in local support for each of your municipalities individually. What we're seeing a lot right now, there are a lot of libraries out there where, as a whole, when we're looking at all of their service areas, they may meet the 0.3 of a mil for all of the service areas together. But when you're looking at the individual municipalities that make up that whole legal service / contracted municipality service area together, most of the contracted areas really are not making the 0.3 of a mil on their own. So I'm doing payments right now, and I can tell you 2 libraries today that I just kind of worked on the math a little bit, and one library, their legal service area is paying about $43 per capita when you run it through a per capita, $43 for their legal service area, and $1.70 for their contracted municipalities for the same service. That is not sustainable. So you definitely want to have some parity there. You want your contracted municipalities to be, approaching or meeting what your legal service area is making. So we have some tools that are available to you for quick looks. So the state aid computation form is available to the public, to everyone. Claire, do you happen to have that link up, or do you want me to share my screen on? I think I've got that link here. You're muted. I'm going to share. I'm going to try to see if I can share without messing anything
There,
up.
I have it up. Oh, here,
Oh,
Joe.
you've got it? Okay.
Yeah, let me make sure it gets over to the right screen here.
Sure.
There we go.
Good. Okay, you went right into it. Great. So this is found on our website at www.michigan.gov/library state aid.
There's a link on the slide to it.
Oh, good. Okay, so right now, the 2024, if you start looking up, is going to be blank. It'll fill in as I make the state aid payments this year, which I am doing. But if we look at 2023, and Claire, dealer's choice, what library would you like to look at?
You want to go to our one that we use the most?
Yeah, let's do that. Good old Escanaba. So we use this one a lot because there are plenty of contracted municipalities in this example, but this is what we do see a lot of the time. If you take a look at that 0.3 of a mil line and all of these contract populations, none of them are making with their local income. They're not even approaching the 0.3 of a mil. What you're left with is Escanaba City, who is the legal service area of that system, providing all of the not all of the funding, but a huge majority of the funding. So the patrons that live in Escanaba City that are part of that legal service area are subsidizing library service for everybody else. And that can be problematic, especially when you go for a millage with that legal service area, and people are paying attention to this, and they see that they're footing the bill for everyone for the same exact service. That can be extremely problematic for the library when they go to pass a millage. But getting back to the computation sheet, so it's showing you that. You can also download this as a PDF for your board. It's a nice printable PDF, but everyone has access to this, so you can go in at any time and look up. Right now, you can look up 22 and 23. For the 24 year, like I said, I'm paying those libraries right now. And as I process those payments, the 24 for the libraries that I have paid will start showing up on the computation sheet. So there's about 40 in there right now. But that'll continue to populate as I continue to pay.
Joe, you want to mention the totals there, how you calculate whether or not
Right.
someone is
So you can see here when we look down at the bottom line, and I'm not sure why taxable value didn't show up as totaled. Usually it does. I'm not sure why there's a blank there. But what I look at is if your total 3/10 of a mil is exceeded by your local operating income, as it is in the case with Escanaba here, then that library is going to get state aid for the entire population it serves. So for all 25,482 people that it serves. What happens some of the time, and I know I'll probably have 10 or 12 libraries this year that will get partial state aid. And what that's going to mean is when I'm looking at that total for the 3/10 of a mil, the total 3/10 of a mil is going to exceed the local operating income. So at that point, what I'll do is I'll start removing municipalities from that service area, from that library system, until I can get to a local income that is higher than the 3/10. And then whatever population is left that meets that, that's what I pay on. So they're not getting full state aid. And generally, you don't want to say always, but most of the time when I look at that, I'm looking at contracted municipalities that are being served for state aid and penal fines. So they're not even approaching the 3/10 of a month they need, and it's costing the library. So when that happens, now we're talking about partial state aid. You might have an issue with your co-op because you're not getting the full state aid. Depending on what how they're charging for the services using the 16.4 indirect state aid, which usually goes to the co-ops. You're impacting that for them as well. So it's a whole can of worms, but at least you're getting some state aid, which means if you're eligible for some state aid, you're still eligible for the state grants. You're eligible for E-rate. When we run into situations where altogether, or I can't eliminate enough municipalities to make 3/10 of a mil in any combination. At that point, you don't qualify for the state aid. You're not going to get the state grants. You're going to have problems with the co-op. You're not getting E-rate. It's not good. So you definitely want to make sure the funding is there. 3/10 of a mil is the absolute floor, though. I want to make that clear. It's not really the goal to shoot for. You want to be higher than the 3/10 of a mil by a significant amount.
Yeah. So, one thing is you can look through this when you're looking at should we get a millage or how much should we ask for, and see, which of your municipalities do not meet their 3/10 of a mil. If that's going to impact your ability to obtain state aid, then part of the consideration for your millage is, should we fill that gap? Should our millage fill that gap between what those service areas are paying and what we need for state aid? But one of the things to consider there, as Joe mentioned, is you end up with some of your patrons paying more for libraries for the same service that others are not paying as much for.
Right.
And a lot of times it's your legal service area that are paying the premium price, and your your contracted service areas are paying substantially less. And like Joe said, these are available to the public. So if a
Mhm.
member of your community, your legal service area happens to see this, especially someone who's having an issue with the library, um, this could cause problems, and it has in other library, in certain library areas. One member of the public finds out that they're paying a significant amount of money for a millage, and other people who are able to use the library are not paying the same amount. It can create some friction. So this is one thing that you definitely want to look at when you're considering your millage.
Right.
Some other things to look at would be, you want to look at your whole library income. So if you already have a millage, you want to look at your existing millage. You want to look at, is your municipal, are you levying your millage to the most you can levy? There are some libraries that don't let you, they may have a millage that's 1 mil, but they don't levy 1 mil. They only
Right.
levy maybe 3/4 of a mil. So if you find that maybe your budget is not high enough for your library, instead of raising your millage, you could renew the same millage and just raise what you levy from that millage. In terms of a millage campaign, that's going to be more palatable to your population rather than trying to raise your millage level. Also consider things like PPT reimbursement, personal property tax reimbursement, which is a payment that many libraries get every year. If you get that, look at that and how much does that contribute to your budget? How much do you get from Renaissance payments if you are able to get Renaissance payments? So the funding, how much do you typically get for penal fines, knowing that penal fines can fluctuate up and down? And also how much do you typically get for state aid? And then it's all of those things together that you look at as far as your expectation of revenue. And if you're looking at a millage, how much should you get? So you want to kind of take into account all those things, but also take into account that, okay, there's a really good chart that Joe puts together on what the penal fine levels have been for the last 10 years.
Mhm.
You can look at, hey, how has our penal fines fluctuated? So then you can make an estimate of the average amount of penal fines and try to use that as part of your calculation on how much money you'd be like you should try for a millage. So there's different strategies you can use, but you definitely want to consider all areas of your income. And if you're not sure as board members what your different areas of income are, that's a huge problem, because if you're a governing board, you have a fiduciary duty, and that means that you're in charge of the money. And if you don't know where your money comes from, then that's a significant problem. So I would ensure that you connect with your director and you make sure you understand where your money comes from, so that you can make these decisions on how much of a millage do we really need to have. Because members of the public, especially in some areas that are very millage resistant, are really going to hold you to, well, why do you need this much? If you have a huge fund balance, okay, a lot of library, if you have a large fund balance or a large investment pool or large, I know there's been a few libraries this year that have been lucky enough to get large bequests. So all of those things are good, but they're things you need to consider if you're going to be asking your community to pay a millage, because they'll ask you, right? Why do I need to pay 1/2 mil or even 3/10 of a mil if you're sitting on $100,000 in a fund balance? Or I know that we received $500,000 in a bequest. Why can't we use that for operating? So these are the things that you're going to want to be prepared to discuss as part of that conversation. So you definitely want to, factor those into your calculation of how much you're going to ask for a millage. Keep in mind that most auditors and accountants will tell you your fund balance should not contain more than 2 to 6 months of the amount of money that would be necessary to operate the library if something catastrophic happened and you didn't have access to your regular funds. So that's something also to consider. You shouldn't be sitting on a giant fund balance that is more than 2 to 6 months of library operating revenues. Okay.
So another quick and dirty thing when you look at that chart, if you wanted to take a look at your per capita,
Oh,
all
sorry,
you would
here,
have to
I
do,
can bring
that's
that
okay.
back.
Yeah, throw it back up there real quick.
Let me get it back. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, all I was going to say is, so take a look at the local income and take that amount and divide it by the population served for that municipality. So we don't need to see it. It's
Oh, okay.
local
You're
income
good.
divided by the total population will give you an idea of what you're getting per capita from each municipality. Don't include that other local income because typically that's going to be fines, fees, donations, and that would be applied across all municipalities. Just take a look at the local for each one, because that, when you're looking at contract municipalities, that's where you're going to see the penal fines. Now, state aid, your contract's going to be for penal fines and obviously state aid, but state aid is not local income. Penal fines counts as local income. State aid does not.
Okay, there's some questions in the chat here, Joe, that might be good to address now.
Okay.
Could you explain when you talked about how you figure out state aid? Could you explain when you say you drop the contracted areas? I think there's some concern that
Yes.
dropping means that they no longer can be served or they should no longer be served.
Okay. So when I'm talking about dropping them from that sheet we looked at, it means I'm taking out the population, because remember, state aid is based on population. So you're getting paid a per capita amount. So it's a little over 50 cents right now per person. So if your whole service area is getting paid, we're taking that 50 cents per person by the entire service area. When I'm pulling people out, pulling municipalities out, now you're losing that population when I'm computing your total state aid. So your state aid is based on the maximum population that meets the 3/10 of a mil in local support. And that's what I mean by partial.
So it's not affecting any contracts you have or
No,
any service. It's only the amount of money that Library of Michigan will pay state aid for the
right.
population.
But I mean, that does kind of lead to, and I don't know if we want to address this later on, but what do you do with those contracted municipalities that aren't making it?
Right. So
And
that's
I think,
another, right.
do you want
That's
to?
actually another question that
Yeah.
somebody has.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so, so we would recommend that you, one says, do you have ideas for approaching municipalities? Or if we have one contract area that is bringing in a lot and another contract area is not. So one is substantially meeting more than 3/10 of a mil, but the other one does not. Should we just drop the one that is not?
I think you
Um,
should negotiate.
Exactly. I wouldn't automatically drop a
Yeah,
municipality. I would go renegotiate the contract. You are always able, unless the contract itself says you cannot renegotiate it for a certain amount of time, you can always go renegotiate a contract. And I definitely would approach that municipality and lay it out for them. Say, look, um, in order to get state aid, we have to meet this amount of money, and you're not meeting this amount of money. Maybe you did it one time, but now times have changed.
sure.
And we have both our legal service area and another service area that does meet it. And it's not fair for some people to pay more than others for the same service. And if they say, well, we don't care if it's fair, because I've had people tell me that,
Yeah,
then you say it's not sustainable for us as a business or as an entity. It's not within our fiduciary duty because it's not
right.
what's best for the library. It's not following the laws that government entities have to follow for selling or providing services or items, because you can only provide services or items for fair market value. And if
Right.
someone's not paying fair market value, then that's not appropriate. So, and municipal people should understand that because they have to follow the same rules. And I think often they don't think of libraries as within their sphere. So it's a matter of some education and explaining to them, look, this is what we can do, and this is the most we can do. And it also requires a willingness to say no. If the
Sure.
municipality
Yes.
comes back and says, nope, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that, then the library has to be willing to say, okay, as of this date, you're no longer served. And you can provide non-residency cards for the people in that area to buy, so that they can continue to have service. And if they don't like that, then inform them and say, hey, the reason you have to do this is because your municipality will not cough up the amount of money that these are worth to pay for
Right.
this.
And that's again where that per capita amount comes in. When you go to renegotiate, have that information handy to be able to show that, hey, this community is paying $1.47 per person, while my legal service area is paying $40 per person for the same service. Another thing to bring up that we've run into before is penal fines and where that money comes from, because there is some confusion with municipalities. They do think that it's their money, when in reality, that's county money that's going to, it can't be used for anything else. It has to be used for library service for a served population. And, that's coming from offenses that happened anywhere in that county, and it's put into the pot and then released based on population of served areas. But that's $0 coming from the municipal coffer. It's coming from the county, and a lot of municipalities don't quite understand that. So that can lead to some confusion as well.
Right. Some municipalities feel that penal fines mean service, and they were never intended to do that. They were always intended to help pay for service. They were never intended to be the sole payment for services. So there's another question here that says that the other issue is that we would lose quite a bit of funding, and it affects another library that shares that contracted area. Well, part of the issue you have to look at is the big picture. So you might lose funding. So that amount of money, you have $5,000 is a lot of money. But one of the things to consider is that, what does it cost your library to provide services to that population? I would bet it's more than $5,000. So it's not sustainable long term for part of your service area to not pay what it costs to provide them the service. A big picture and down the road, it's not going to be sustainable. So even though it might seem like a big amount of money at the time, the fact that it wouldn't be, long term, because you wouldn't, if you're not serving them, you're not having to, pay the extra costs for certain things. It's a determination that the director and the board have to make, as far as, or whoever the entity is under your establishment law, as far as, what you're willing to do. The problem is that and like anything else, it's a risk balance calculation, but, it's fundamentally not good business practice, and in many ways is a problem with public money if you're giving one area preference over another. So by giving services to a service area for less money than what your legal service area, so the people that you were created to serve, if they're paying more for services, then they're essentially paying for that other area to get service. And that's just at a fundamental level not right. But even from a business standpoint, it's not sustainable to have one customer pay for another customer's product, because all it will take is that one customer to find out, and then you're in trouble. So this is something that you can see how, it could be how many people in that area use the library. If it's a lot, then that gives you even more reason to go to that community and say, look, all of these people use our library, but you're not paying the fair share. And a lot of times, a lot of times the patrons are okay with that. Because if the community says no, the service area, and you cut services, the patrons are going to be, what the hell? And if you explain it to them, a lot of times they go to their municipality and say, no, we want this. What are you doing? We're willing to pay for it. There's a couple libraries in the state right now that are actually putting millages on the ballot for service areas via petition, which means the municipality has no say in whether or not the millage gets on the ballot. And if the millage passes, great. That means the community wants service. If the millage doesn't pass, well, that means maybe the community didn't really value library service after all. And you can do a non-residency card for those members of that community that really want and value that service.
Now, there are definitely options. It's not just millage or nothing. There are definitely options.
For a library's general fund is an endowment fund held in a community foundation included in that general fund calculation. So that depends on what the details of the endowment are.
Right.
So when you're looking at how much money you should ask for in a millage, I'm not saying that you have to say, well, we can't get a millage because we have $500,000 in a community foundation. What I'm saying is you want to recognize that and be prepared to talk to your members of your community who might ask, why should we have a millage when you have $500,000 in a community fund? So that okay, this money is set aside for maybe it's your pension fund, maybe it's for a building, maybe the endowment specifically said you can only spend this money on X. So there's a lot of variables there. In some bequests, libraries can easily pull the money out. I know with community foundations, it can get a little bit more complicated with that. So it's one of those things that depending on the nature of the funds, it's not that you have to include them in your general fund, it's that you want to be prepared to discuss them as part of that millage conversation. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So a millage, remember that a millage is in effect only for a certain amount of time, right? So your board and the director will want to look at, well, how long should our millage be? Should we have a 5-year millage, a 4-year millage, a 10-year millage, a 20-year millage? Keep in mind that the longer your millage is, the more things could change in between, and you may find either you don't have enough money. Some libraries with perpetual millages, it seems like, oh, that's great. They have a millage forever. But the perpetual millage was passed in 1940, and it's for 0.25. And now it's 2024 and 0.25 isn't cutting it. And now the library is like, we need more money. But you don't want to necessarily open up that perpetual millage because that is a guaranteed 0.25. But now you have to explain to your community, well, we're going to try to get another millage, right? So that can get dicey. So part of your conversation is, how long should our millage be? Should we, do a 4-year millage, but then in 4 years, we're going to have to do this all over again? But that might give us an opportunity to either pop the millage up or pop it down, depending on what the economic circumstances are. Do we want a 10-year millage? There's a lot of libraries in the state that have 10-year millages. Some have 20-year millages. So it really, that's a question that is your board and your director and your finance people should really discuss to figure out how long your millage is. What do you think, Joe? Jill? What do you think as far as the duration of a millage?
I'm muted. Yeah, I started talking, but
Oh.
um, the one thing though that I see, because I also maintain that millage election sheet on the trustee page, and when we're looking at that, when I see a millage for 2 years, or I see a millage for a year, it happens. Boy, that's in my opinion, that's way too short.
Yeah.
It's like you're constantly running for office.
Yeah.
And you really, libraries have things to do.
Yeah.
When I look at millage duration, I'm looking at 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's pretty good.
Sometimes a year might be, if you have a library that has a millage renewal, but yet maybe they're considering becoming a district in a year or two.
Right.
Sometimes they'll do a smaller millage to account for that. I think sometimes there's smaller millages to account for some capital projects. But you're right.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm talking. I meant operating. I wasn't talking building bond. Right. But yeah, the operating millages for
most libraries. Yeah, you don't want to have to be in perpetual millage mode. Which, if you get a millage for only a year, that's pretty much what you are. But remember too, there are some libraries that consider that millage without a vote, section 1 city library, to be a regular millage for a year, and it's not. So if you're a section 1 city library and you get your annual millage from your municipality and it's 1 mil, that's not the kind of millage that we're talking about. So if you're considering some more things, considering in terms of time frame, would be look at your taxable values over the service areas over the last 5 to 10 years, because those also fluctuate, right? So if that's something else to consider, is because that's going to determine how much you get. If you're in an area where the taxable values may fluctuate a lot, then you may want to do 5-year millages. Look at your library's budget over the same time and see, employment things change. Keep your eye on up and coming things that are coming. Right now, the Supreme Court is in Michigan is considering the constitutionality of the law, the referendum that would increase the minimum wage. So if the Supreme Court decides to affirm, I think it's affirm the Court of Appeals, then the minimum wage will shoot up. And that could cost you a lot of money. So these are all, if you're going for a millage now, you may want to tentatively include that as part of your calculation for how much money you're going to need, in case that does pass. If it doesn't pass, well, you'll have a little money left over maybe, but you definitely don't want to be caught unawares or with your pants down that you don't have enough money to cover increase, or that you may have to lay people off, which would be horrible.
Right.
And also review your penal fine and state amounts you've been receiving over the past several years, because that can also give you a good idea of how they may be in the future, like what the average of the fluctuation is, which is no guarantee.
Yeah,
but
we've been fortunate the last 3 years on state aid that it has gone up to. I mean, it stayed static this year, but the fact that it's across the 50 cents per capita, we haven't seen that in a very long time. And then for penal fines, all I can say about penal fines is remember you're betting on human behavior,
right?
Plus local capture,
right?
Which I don't think we talked about. So
right.
Yeah.
Right, millage capture, which if you have a new millage passed after December 31st, 2016, your millage should not be captured.
Yeah. Well, Claire, what I meant by capture
anyway.
was local ordinances
that
are taking
gotcha.
money away from that penal. So if the offense is written on the state's law, that money's going to penal fines. But if there's a local ordinance that the ticket is written to local ordinance, that money's not going to the penal fine coffer.
Right.
And that's happening more and more.
It's going to the municipality.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so then we talk about, do you have a perpetual or time limited millage? And we talked a little bit about perpetual millages. It's a good idea to talk with your attorney about this. There are some, in addition to the question of, perpetual millages are locked in. There's a good and bad thing about that. And, also if you have a perpetual millage, it can a lot of municipalities that have perpetual millages, the citizenry feels like, okay, we're done with that. The library is funded. And if you try to go back and get more, they're like, well, wait a minute, we already have a millage. Why? So it can be harder to have that conversation. Which doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you have to be prepared to maybe campaign for your millage a different way. But perpetual millages can be very stable, right? It's always there. So that's something else to take a look at. So there are some circumstances where you may or may not be able to have a perpetual millage depending on what your establishment type is. So that is definitely something to discuss with your attorney. Okay, we talked about that. So how do you figure out how much money is 3/10 of a mil, and how do you figure out how much money you can get from your millage? Joe?
And you can see that right on that computation form where it's showing you the taxable value for the area and then 3/10. If you were to take the taxable value and multiply it by that 0.0003, it's going to give you that
Yes.
3/10 right on that sheet.
Right.
But that's what it is. Figure out what your taxable value is for the year and multiply by 0.0003, and that will give you that 3/10 of a mill in local support for that area.
Yep. So if you are thinking we're going to go for a millage of 0.5, you can multiply that 0.0005
Yep.
times the taxable value in each of the municipalities where that millage is going to be levied, and that will give you the total amount of money that you should get in revenue from that area for your millage. So you
For
can
that
kind of
year.
for that year. So you can kind of right because of the taxable values can change. So
Yep.
that gives you an idea of what your budget could be or what this amount of money would add. So we talked about this. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So that's our how much money you should have and how do you know how much money something will generate. I'm going to stop the slides now so that if there's some additional questions, we can talk about them. So let's see. If 5 years, oh wait, here we go. I'm going backwards. Is it better to only have one ask or is it okay to put 2 questions out? A Headley override and then changing a debt millage to an operating millage. I have to say that's one of those questions where there's so many things that depends on. I think in general, it's better to have the less asks you have, the better. But that can depend on your area, right? Your community. If you're lucky enough to be in a community that's very library supportive, then it may not be a problem, especially if you're very good at explaining why you have 2. You may want to wait. You may want to do one ask one year and then do your Headley override maybe the next year. See which one is more important. So that's one of those questions that's hard to say. I don't think there's one general answer for everybody. I know that generally for voters, the more succinct you make it and the less questions you ask, probably the better. We have a millage that ends next year. Is there a different process for renewing one? Nope, it's the same process. But you may want to talk to your attorney about when would be the best time to put your millage on the ballot, depending on when your current millage is levied. You want to make sure that you don't have a gap, right, between the time that your last millage levy and when you pass your new millage. Many do August for that reason, so they can put it back on the November ballot. One of the things about August that can be problematic is the timing. So if you have I think it's like 125 days is when you have to put your ballot language, submit your ballot language, like around 125 days before the election. So that can get tight. So again, I would discuss it with your attorney because from a political strategy standpoint, if you're in an area where millage could be like if you're in an area where the millage conversation is tough and you fail the first time, you may want to give yourself a little bit extra time to really kind of push those explanations to your community. So you may want to talk to your attorney to kind of strategize to decide whether it's better to go on May or whether it's better to go on August in order to give you that time to recoup and put it again on November. Is it a good idea to renew for the same amount of time? Generally, in my experience, that's what people do, unless it's a very short amount of time, but generally if they're doing 5 years or 10 years. But that can also depend on, what is the stability of your library funding? Is your current budget meeting or exceeding your needs? Because remember, once you get a millage, it's set for a certain amount of time. So if you're doing 10 now and you're considering, 15 or 20, then, what is the likelihood that you're going to regret that because either, taxable values go down or, that higher minimum wage comes up or something else happens that in that those, because that's a long time, that could affect your what your the base of your revenue is. So again, that's a discussion that could depend on where you are and what your taxable values are. And um, again, that's one of those things where I would look at long term. I would take a chance to look at what are your penal fines for the long term? What have your state aid been? What has your taxable values been for the past 10, 20 years? What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Take a look at what's been happening and um, try to get your forecast together. Are your taxable values going up every year? Or are things flat? What's happening there? Penal fines. Keep an eye on any new local ordinances that could affect your penal fines. State aid, again, we've been lucky the last few years, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Yeah.
And then is there anyone in Michigan who does political forecasting who could tell us when is the best time to put the ask out if there's a new ask? Well, you could start with Shirley, who has been doing this for a very long time, and has been very successful in her consultancy. But you could also contact Every Library. So Every Library is a nonprofit. They do talk to libraries for free. You can also hire them to consult, but it's definitely worth talking to them to ask them what their opinions. They work in all 50 states. So my conversations with them is that they have a good sense of the various states. So, that would be someone who that's their business, is pretty much political forecasting. That's what they do. So that would be a good set person to ask. And I will put their information in the chat, but they're easily accessible via, if you just Google it, you'll find them. If 5 years into a 10-year millage, you find out that you did not ask for enough, can you go back and ask for a revision? I think you can. Your best bet would probably be to ask for another millage to add on to it. But I think you can. I think you can go back and increase it. But it's probably easier to ask for a new one, an additional one. A good time to go for a millage. Again, it trends on what the best time of year is the best time to go for a millage. Again, I would talk to either Shirley or you could talk to Every Library, because political forecasting is not my forte, but I can tell you just from experience that November can be difficult because depending on your municipality or your county, we all have seen those ballots in November where the millage asks go on forever.
Mhm.
And generally people really read the first few, but then by the time they get to the last one, they're either all no's or all yeses. So it may depend on your county and who else is going to put a millage on the ballot, and you should be able to talk to your county or your municipal uh, treasurer or your municipal clerk really to find out who else is going to be on the ballot, because best case scenario, you want to be on the ballot when a million other people aren't on the ballot. So for most
Right.
most times people try not to be on November for that reason. But if you blow one millage, if you don't get it in like May or August and you want to try again, then November is usually when people try again. So, you may want to start at either May or August, and then you have November as a backup if you don't get it. What were you going to say, Joe?
I was going to say, take a look at that Michigan Public Library election results. That goes back to 2010
Oh, that's a good
to
idea.
today. So yeah, and I see a whole lot of August on here, but we've definitely take a look at it. Libraries have been pretty successful lately on millages. I've only got a few fails here, uh, and those are easy to spot on this sheet. They're bright red, but
Mhm.
yeah, there is a whole lot of August on here, and then I see some where they failed and then they're on November. So, so like
Mhm.
you've said, if they happen to fail in August, you've got that other opportunity in November, and I'm seeing
Mhm.
evidence of that here.
Yes, John, we will definitely, the email that you'll get after this session will include the slides as well as a link to the recording. So Julie posted, I understand schools do this and they go out and say this is not an increase from what the resident was paying. I'm not sure which thing she was um, referring to. I can think of a couple different scenarios. Julie, if you want to unmute and clarify, you can. I may have just missed it, but for sure there are.
Hi,
Oh,
hi,
go ahead.
hi, Claire. Um, we have a current building bond for 2 more years, and it was for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Can we use that coming off the books
Mhm.
to ask the community for sustaining funding?
Oh, sure.
Okay. And how successful have you found that to be? Like using, do you know what I mean? Knowing that something was out there instead of going and doing Headley.
Right. Well, I know that in other circumstances, like for example, in cases where a municipality was giving an appropriation, like the township or the city was handing the library money out of their budget, and then the library decided to go for a millage in a comparable amount. That discussion with the voter of, hey, we've been getting a mill from the general fund of the municipality. So if we get a mill via a millage, it's the same amount. You're not going to be paying any more. Generally, those have been successful, but it all depends on, how you educate your constituency. So I think it can be successful.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Uh, okay, Joe, when will the counting opinions database be updated with the most recent data?
Ah, okay. I'm glad somebody asked that. So the stuff that we just collected, I work in tandem with, so if y'all recall, there used to be another person that did the state aid and then I did the data. Well, now I'm doing both. So I pay on one hand, and then in the other hand, I'm taking that data and giving it to vetting it and then putting it up to IMLS. So our state collection becomes part of the federal collection, the Federal Public Library Survey, or PLS. And I do those at the same time. So generally the new data, because the payment side is going very well, so we should be moving very smoothly with the payment side, which allows me more time to work on the data side. So I'm thinking probably early June, all of that information should be available.
Awesome.
And it might be earlier, but you know.
We have a perpetual millage at 1 mil from 1981, now less 0.82-ish. If we wanted to get back to 1, I presume it would require a whole new millage campaign of 0.18 to get back to the agreed upon 1 mil. You could do a Headley override. So what a Headley override is essentially it is another millage, but it's not a whole new millage. So you're not going back to the voters to say, give us the 0.82. It's would be okay, we're only gonna get a millage for the 0.18. And then you explain that it's the Headley override, so that what we're looking for is to attain the revenue that was approved in 1981. And that's been done by a lot of libraries. So that's also very possible to do. I know that there is some Headley discussions in the legislature. There are several legislators that want to change this, and I think the municipalities also want to change this and revise Headley or get rid of it. So that's something to also keep an eye on and talk to your local legislator about. But yeah, you can definitely just it's called a Headley override. And Jack, I can definitely send you the information on that. The MSU extension does a nice whole explanation of what that is. Who is in charge of putting a millage on the ballot when it is a contracted service area? So that can happen a couple different ways. The library can talk to the municipality, and the municipality, so the township, board or the city council, can put it on the ballot. If they're resistant, then the library could talk to some of the patrons from that area and try to get a petition started to put a millage on the ballot. And that would be, a petition form, and you have to have a certain amount of members of the community of the electors in that municipality to sign it, and then the municipality has to put it on the ballot. So those are kind of the two ways for a contracted area that's not already a legal service area, or a district library member to do it. And for your particular situation, you can talk to your lawyer and see which one they think might be the best way to go. If you go the petition route, you want to make sure you really understand what are what we call formalities of the petition, because it has to be done exactly right, or it'll get kicked out during the process. Oh, Andrea says that her community funded Olympic pool. They should be able to, I agree, they should be able to find funding to their library. Totally agree. Totally agree. And hopefully, if your community funded it, I'm guessing it was a millage and not like a grant or something. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It would be nice. Or at least want to put an Olympic pool in the library.
No, that's a whole other set of problems.
Yeah, true. Okay. Anybody have any other questions? We're a little bit ahead of time here. Oh, we have one more millage. Oh, that's what we were hoping to do, not Seago. Okay. Let's see. More. Oh, thank you. Well, you're welcome. So we will make sure that Becky sends out the email, although usually I'm sure Becky is very good at doing that, and she's the one who makes sure that we send her the slides in a good fashion so that she can send them out. Usually we're the stopgap, not Becky. Is there somewhere we can find a suggested timeline of the millage process? How long each part of the process takes? Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know of anyone, but I'll check and see if I can find one. I know that like the legal requirements in terms of like when ballot documents have to be in, but as far as reasonably what it takes to get from the idea of a millage to actually going to the polls, like how far ahead you should start the process. I know a lot of people suggest like a year in advance. But let me snoop around and see what I can find, Andrea. I'll see if I can find something on that. And I'll ask like every library and stuff to see if they have any recommendations. And I think anybody else? Joe, do you know of anything like that?
I was thinking when she asked that and I was reading it, I was like, I bet you Shirley has an idea.
Shirley probably also, you're right. Shirley probably also has some ideas about that.
I was also thinking, well, this is just the first one in the millage series, and I bet you we'll get to that as
and
we
I
go
don't
through.
know. I don't know if Shirley is on today. She might not be. So I'll contact Shirley and ask her that question too, and see if she has any suggestions, because that's a really good idea, Joe. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your kind words, and hope everyone has a great week.